All right, here we go. It is episode 59 of Stick to Hockey Live. It is Jason Martinez and the Dueling Anthonys. We've got Anthony DeMarco from thefourthperiod.com, and we've got Anthony Sanfilippo from Crossing Broad at Crossing Broadcast, Snow the Goalie, and much more. What's going on, boys?
It's good to be back with you guys. I haven't talked to you two on this program in a while. It's good to be back.
It takes a monumental occasion to get it done here, and we certainly have one.
Yeah, you can say
this
that
is when Jay doesn't fit anymore. That's when Jay's the third wheel.
No, I'm not the paisan.
That's right.
So,
not the paisan, wrong first name, don't have hair, the whole thing.
Well, wait a second. Wait a second. Not that I have much hair.
Yeah.
So I just hide it a little bit more under these backwards hats. That's all.
I was watching The Sopranos the other day. I don't know why, but I love that show. And Melfi's asking him why he picked her. He goes, I looked it up and I saw this guy and that guy and this lady. That's why I picked a paisan because she had an Italian last name. I picked the paisan. Anyway, tons to get to. Let's start here. ASF. What did hearing that Dave Scott is stepping down April 17th and will not be the governor in the new league year, which begins July 1st. No great shock here. Are you shocked at all by the timing of it before the end of the season?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't say I was shocked, but it did surprise me a little bit because everything that I had been told was that it was going to take place as soon as the season was over. I just get the sense that the way this organization operates now, they try to make it seem like they're doing things. They try to be a little shifty, like, haha, we surprised you on the timing of it, but that's okay. And we all did see it. We had heard it was going to happen. We saw it kind of coming, especially after the first week of March, which was kind of Waterloo for the organization, right? Mm-hmm. And really, I had someone call me the Monday after the deadline and identified every day something bad that happened from the Tuesday prior straight through and said that, there was a big meeting on Sunday and they called it the most sobering week in the history of the franchise. Now, I thought that might have been a little bit hyperbolic, but at the same time, I got it right and I understood it was the week that they finally said enough is enough, because I think that they heard enough from the fans. They got a lot of negative national media attention, obviously with the Rangers fans taking over the Wells Fargo Center that game, which was a nationally televised game. Of course, there was the whole screw up. Not that it was their fault, but it was their whole screw up with
it's actually the Rangers' fault.
Yeah, the streaming went bad, so it was just like but of course that didn't help the optics of it, right? But so
it doesn't matter whose fault it is.
It's right. And then you had the deadline, which again was not as bad as everyone meant to make it out to be. It was again an optics thing. Then you have the season ticket holder town hall where they boo the hell out of Chuck Fletcher, and every radio station starts paying attention to the Flyers in a negative way. Local TV giving them negative coverage, and it was just it was a culmination of all that within a span of 5 days. And they said, all right, we have to make a change. And so this is it led to this. And this is and that's not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. Change is a good thing sometimes. And I think that this will ultimately be better for the organization. It's not going to sit there and say there's going to be a magic wand and everything's going to suddenly be hunky-dory this summer. But at the same time, I think that there will be at least a cohesive direction and a cohesive message that comes out from the organization. And I think those are the most important things. As long as the fans see that you are jointly gearing toward something as a goal and everybody's pulling the same rope, then they'll pull the rope with you. It's when the messaging seems off or different, or they feel like they're being gaslit, that's when they get pissed off. And I think that's where we're at. So I think that's going to be a positive for the organization.
Yeah, you have to have consistency in your strategic vision, and you have to be able to articulate that with consistency amongst different people.
Yeah.
And DeMarco, when you look at this is not change for the sake of change. I'm seeing a lot of people saying that, well, this doesn't mean anything as long as Comcast still owns the team. It's just putting a different face on it. I don't see it that way at all, but I mean, a lot of corporations own teams. We talked about MLSE, and the Fenway Group owns the Penguins. Having corporate ownership allows you to have corporate dollars that aren't just dependent on just hockey. So it can kind of supplement the income of a hockey team as well. But I don't look at this as just moving one man out and moving another man in.
If done the right way, corporate ownership is basically the best situation in sports, because you look at, let's say, private ownership, and it could be the best case scenario, let's say like Ed Snyder, or it could be the worst case scenario like we saw with the Ottawa Senators and Eugene Melnyk for all those years, who he cared so much, but at the same time, he cared about his wallet a bit more. And I've always equated it, you just brought it up, to MLSE with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think that is the structure that the Flyers are barreling towards. Like I was told yesterday that like once all is said and done, like Hilferty is not going to be, and I'm sure like this is not news to anyone, he's not going to be at press conferences. He's not going to be at many media availabilities. Like he's going to let the soon to be president and presumably Danny Briere as the general manager have all that information funneled through them. And I think that's the way you have to operate. And I think that Charlie O'Connor had a really good tweet about this yesterday. I don't want to butcher it, but more or less he said something about like, it's not about selling the team. Corporate ownership isn't the problem. It's the fact that Dave Scott was just listening and trusting the wrong guys. And I think that's pretty accurate as to what happened here, is that Dave Scott, who Hockey Ops reported directly to, and could speak to this better than me, was listening to advisors and leaning on them far too much. And that's why when people complain about guys like Bob Clark or Bill Barber or Paul Holmgren, I don't blame them for holding the title as advisors and giving their opinion. I blame the organizational structure, that these were the guys helping to contribute to the organizational philosophical direction, and being the guy that the ultimate decision maker would hang his hat on in terms of final big decision making, specifically over the last several months, whether or not to fire Chuck Fletcher and completely overhaul Hockey Ops. So now that you have a new guy in Hilferty coming in with what I've heard is a new, I guess, forward-thinking approach to organizational structure. And I think that's why I've said that the change had to go well beyond Chuck Fletcher. He was part of the problem, but not the whole problem, was because I just never thought it made sense that the GM was reporting directly to the quasi-owner, if you will. And it seems like Hilferty is spearheading an approach to completely shake that up. And like I said, I think Ant could speak to it more about how the organizational structure has been flawed ever since Paul Holmgren pretty much retired in June of 2019.
Well, I mean, I've done a little digging on Hilferty. He had a lot of connection to a lot of radio people that I worked with when he ran IBC, Independence Blue Cross. He brought the World Cup to Philly, which is going to be here in a couple of years. But from what I understand, the guy is, A, he's a huge Philadelphia sports fan. B, he's apparently relentless in his pursuit of success, no matter what he's in. And he is definitely his own man. What do you know about Hilferty, Ant?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just said is true. And I think that the most important thing here, and this kind of will tie into what Ant was just saying, is that, and I think it's easy for fans to misinterpret Dan Hilferty's role. Okay. I see it all the time on Twitter. I see it on the Facebook comments and everything. And they're saying, oh, they're just going from one guy who's not a hockey guy to another suit who's not a hockey guy. And that's irrelevant. Okay. People need to understand, you don't need to be well versed in the sport, like a deep nerd of the sport, to be a good owner. I mean, look around the city. I mean, how many of the owners here are really like doing that kind of involvement? I mean, Josh Harris knows nothing about basketball, yet the Sixers are successful. John Middleton isn't, making decisions, baseball decisions. He's involved with the money, of course, but he's not making baseball decisions. And the Phillies went to the World Series, right? The Eagles went to the Super Bowl. Jeff Lurie lets Howie Roseman basically do whatever he has to do as GM.
Hire the right people and let them do their job.
Right. So that's it. So I want to clear that up. I mean, Dan Hilferty doesn't need to be a hockey guy, but what Dan Hilferty needs to be with Dave Scott, which Dave Scott was not, is a person who understands where sports, and in this particular case, hockey, falls on the Philadelphia landscape. And as a guy who grew up here and experienced it and as a fan himself, he's light years ahead of Dave in that front, right? He's not going to need to pay Bill Barber to be, the hockey whisperer, because he understands that there is right. I mean, he understands what the sport of hockey is. He doesn't need to be an executive who wants to know all the ins and outs of why you're drafting a particular player or why you're trading for a particular player. But he understands hockey, and he understands where it fits in Philadelphia and how important it is to this fan base. And so because of that, that's exactly what you need. And Dave never got to that point. He was miscast from day one. Okay. And that's the thing, that if you want to say, going back to the end of the Snyder era, obviously, Dave was put in place before Ed passed away, but Ed had his hand in picking Dave to be his replacement.
That's what I was going to just ask you, because that was the guy that he selected.
And so what I was going to say is that I kind of feel like, because we were nearing the end for Ed as far as from the business perspective, he had his guy prior to Dave, and it was Peter Luca.
Yeah.
And then that whole NBC audit came out, and and Peter ended up being given his golden parachute, right, to jump out the plane, and move on to other things. And Ed was now left with having to find someone new in a short period of time. And I think he settled for Dave Scott, because that's who Comcast may have offered up and whatever. And so I think that was...
I think he thought it was going to be shorter too, Andy. He thought it was going to be a transitional period, because Dave was coming out of retirement as well.
Yes. I think he thought it was going to be transitional and not something that was going to be, 10 years. Well, and actually it was 9, right? I think it was 9, right?
Yeah,
14. I think it was 14 when Dave Scott was...
I think it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
So it might have been 10 years, right? So 10, even a decade. So it was
I seem to remember him coming in right after the lockout, almost. Right after they came back from that lockout. Yeah. And just to kind of piggyback on all that, I wanted to ask you, and even Jay, because you guys have been more around the team intimately than me over the past or the last decade rather. And it seemed like in the early years of Dave Scott, specifically the Ron Hextall years when Homer was still president, we knew who he was, but we didn't really know who he was. He was kind of like the Jacobs or Larry Tannenbaum in Toronto. Do you think Dave Scott's heavy involvement in being the final decision maker on hockey ops was because he lost trust when they left Ron Hextall to all his devices?
Well, I know that there was a conflict between them. So I think that Dave felt like he needed to become more actively involved because of that. And I think
to keep everybody involved.
Yes. Yeah. Really. I mean, it was the end of the Hextall era was very ugly internally, with a lot of people. And I think Dave then felt it was important to then be more active, because he was very passive at that time. He was really not involved. He let Paul kind of run the show as president. And so then you had Paul basically saying, I don't want to do this anymore. The whole Hextall thing got out of control. And so Dave felt, rather than replace Paul with another person who is more intimately involved with the sport, he was going to take the more active role. And I think that was where his mistake really came in, because they could have fixed it at that point. They could have gotten back on track after you fired Hextall. He did, but he didn't know what to do and relied on, Clark to say, well, hey, Chuck Fletcher, he's got experience. I know his dad really well. I gave him his first job, blah, blah, blah. And obviously was not the right mix for this organization. But that was where Dave's turn made things go even further downhill, as opposed to righting the ship and get back in the other direction. Because I think it would have been, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was a real chance at that point to get going back in the right direction with the organization. And it just went the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, I often wonder too, if the pandemic didn't hit, and Niskanen probably wouldn't have retired. He retired, I think, because he didn't want to deal with the restrictions of the pandemic. And, some of the injury things that happened under Chuck Fletcher's watch, he just turned out to have some really bad luck too. He didn't do himself any favors once the team started circling the drain. He exacerbated it and unclogged it a little bit. But if those injuries don't happen, or the pandemic, he may have a totally different tenure. We'll never know. But that's all.
The only thing
bridge.
And the only thing with that, I mean, everybody always says, oh, well, everybody had to deal with the pandemic, and it's like,
some teams were equipped to handle it, and some weren't.
Right, and the Flyers were not equipped to handle it, and that was not all Chuck Fletcher's fault that they were not equipped to handle it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the flat cap came with it, and some teams were just better positioned with contracts that were coming up and weren't coming up, that they could handle that element a lot better.
Correct. But that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't absolve him. It doesn't absolve him. He was not a very good general manager while he was here. But at the same time, you do have to be able to put that a little bit in perspective and say that was the hand he was also dealt coming in as well.
Well, one thing I had heard, and this is, I mean, I'll preface this by saying that this person had told me, just like working, so closely in the organization while Chuck has been here, like he made our lives a living hell a lot of time with the mistakes that he made. But they also said, this person, was that they believe that he was sandbagged from day one, given both titles right off the bat. That right off the bat, he was put in a no-win position, and that not a lot of people realized how bad of a situation Ron Hextall left behind. And people still to this day try and, pump the tires of the Hextall era, and don't really acknowledge how poor of a situation it was, both on and off the ice. So, like, again, I would ask both you guys, like, do you think anything would have been different with Chuck if maybe Homer would have stayed on as president, or they would have found a more intimate president, as you mentioned, Adam, if he had just gotten the GM title?
I think that when you have a GM that's also the president of hockey ops and has to report upstairs to ownership, that compromises a GM. And here's why. The GM cannot make moves based on butts in seats. You just can't. You can't be worried about that part. You need a president to shield you from that. And then the other thing too, like, it's funny because, we talk about the advisors so much, the three advisors, Clark, Barber, and Paul Holmgren. But during the Hextall era, those advisors had no say. He had an inner circle of two, himself and Chris Pryor, and that was it.
Yep.
And that rubbed some people the wrong way. And then Chuck came in and was probably too inclusive and too many voices, which, there was so much paralysis by analysis, hearing so many different opinions, that you lose touch with being able to pull a move. So I don't know if Homer had stayed on, what that would have done. I think he was cooked at that point.
Or not even just Homer, just a buffer.
So here's and that, I think that was also a problem. And if we really want to break it down and kind of look at the analysis of it here, Paul Holmgren as a president of hockey operations would have been fine. The president role at the time was one that straddled two fences, right? And it was a role that also incorporated the business side. He was the president of the club. So Paul was pulled in many directions, several of which he had no previous experience dealing with, and was kind of at the end of his career trying to learn on the fly. And I think that ended up becoming, a mistake as well. When you look at the presidents before him, and you look at the people that were in those positions, we already mentioned Luca, but even if you go back to Ron Ryan, these were guys who were business people who had ties to hockey, not hockey people who had ties to business. And I think that it is a big difference, right? Yeah. And so I think that kind of created another element of confusion and uncertainty within the organization. So it probably wasn't the right thing to make Paul the president and then giving the job to Chuck after Paul technically retires, I guess, or semi-retires. That, like you said, Ant, was, fait accompli. Like, he had no business being both roles. Somebody else needed to be in that position, which they're now going to try and do, but have it be specifically just for the hockey operation, reporting back to ownership, and not trying to either straddle two fences or one person having both jobs. That was both of those alternatives did not work. This setup that Dan Hilferty is now trying to create is going to be the one that has the best chance of working, if you're understanding following the relationships with everybody.
And Sanfilippo, what's your reporting telling us about potential president candidates of hockey operations? Not president of the club,
Yeah.
president of hockey operations. What are you hearing here?
Well, I've heard very little. I'll be honest. A couple names have come up to me, but they were just kind of early in the process names that really kind of got thrown my way. Scott Mellenby was one that kind of got mentioned to me early. I have not heard anything new on him, but I keep saying it because it's the one of the names that was told right away that there was under consideration. I heard Robert Esch's name mentioned as well. And I know people are going to sit here and say, oh, my God, here they go. Former Flyers all over again. It is not the same thing. It's because Warner's decade, 15-year Robert Esch, 30 years ago for Scott Mellon is not mean that, you are liar pipe. This is a different code, right? There are always connectivity in some
people. And we're going to clear up your connections a little, bots for a second. But yeah, I'll speak to that while we get Ant cleared up.
Yeah.
Mellenby right now is with St. Louis as an advisor for Doug Armstrong. And while he did play for the Flyers, he's not a former Flyer. He's a former Florida Panther. That's where he played most of his career. And he's got a lot of head office management experience with Montreal. I like Scott a lot. I think he's a very smart guy. I had him on Flyers Daily last year when we were looking back at some of the former players. Esch is one that, he's like the mayor of Utica. But he hasn't worked in an NHL front office. I think it's important for Danny to have somebody that worked in an NHL front office.
I agree. I think Mellenby is a more likely candidate and probably a better candidate. But I think that the whole thing with Esch is that, he did really, really well. I look what the Utica Comets have become since Robert Esch put them in place, right? And there is a connection with Danny. They were teammates in Arizona, Phoenix at the time, right? So there's that too. So there might be some kind of interconnectivity there that makes some sense, but I don't think that he should be the favorite for the role. But but what I was saying before my internet cut there for a second was, and I think you probably addressed it, Jay, but don't just assume because there's a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon everything with a player to Philadelphia Flyers that it's always the same path that has been followed. While that has been the case most of the time, and there has been a connectivity to Bob Clark, Paul Holmgren, and their chain, right? Their tree. This is not that. Like if you bring in a Mellenby or Esch or anybody else that may have played here, it's very likely that these people are coming on their own accord and not through, this is their connection through Homer and Clarkie.
Yeah, Homer and Clark are connected to everybody in the game at this point in their lives. Their tree has a ton of branches.
Yeah.
Are you hearing anything about Shiro, Anthony DeMarco?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Shiro was a name that has been brought up to me a lot. And I reached out actually to someone with the Minnesota Wild yesterday. And that's where Ray Shero is working right now as a senior advisor. And I was told that they don't feel comfortable commenting on that at this time, which to me kind of points in the direction like we're still playing. I don't want anything leaked right now. So I haven't got it confirmed, but if I had to make a best educated guess is that he's a guy that is been at least kick tires on.
Yeah.
I've heard some whispers, but not from direct sources, but I've heard whispers that he's among their top candidates because of his experience in the game. Obviously a Stanley Cup under his belt as well. I've also heard that maybe he thinks that he could get a full-time GM job somewhere where he has full hockey say because of what's going on in New Jersey. So maybe he's not interested. But if I had neither the Flyers or the Minnesota Wild to me have confirmed it, but kind of connecting dots, reading the tea leaves, he's someone that's been higher up on their list, and I'm led to believe they at least reached out.
Yeah, and I had heard his name as well. I think that I think that's one though that's a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? That one falls more towards the other side.
And
that
his
one
son's
falls,
a scout too.
His son's a scout with the team, right? His son's a scout. There's one son's a scout with the Flyers. The other one's a scout with the Blue Jackets, right? I think Kyle's with the Flyers.
Yeah.
Right. And Chris is with the Blue Jacket. I trying to remember which one's which.
Yeah, it's Kyle, and he's a college scout.
Yeah, he's like in New England, I believe, right? He's a New England college scout. Yeah. And so that one there is more. That one does come through that tree, right? Whether or not that they're reaching out to him without the influence of Clark and Holmgren on this decision, that's still going to be perceived that way. And so I'm not trying to knock Ray Shero. He's got great success. He's got a lot of experience. But that's one that this fan base will give a much shorter rope to.
100%. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like if you hire Ray Shero, you better get it right the first time.
Yeah.
You better.
It's important, I think, to hire, not who the fans want, but hire the right guy. You know what I mean?
Well, for sure.
If that's Shero, then it's Shero. Okay. But yeah, it's got to be the right guy. If it's Mellenby or if it's somebody else, like JB said, if Dubas gets canned, would you consider bringing in Dubas?
No.
I look at Dubas and I go, why would I bring in Dubas?
Yeah.
I mean, he signed those 3 forwards to monster contracts and can't build a team. So when you have Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and John Tavares, and you haven't won a playoff round, there's not much I want from you.
Yeah. And it's not only that. I mean, not only did he sign them to those monster contracts, but you want to talk about and Ant probably can address this better than I can. But you want to talk about the notion of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, hoping that you'll get it right. It'll eventually be right the second time, third time, fourth time. That's all Dubas has been. He's a one-trick pony, and it has not worked. Now, do I think that they're finally going to win a playoff series this year?
I don't.
Well, Tampa's not.
Tampa.
They've not looked good to me, Jay. They've been a very inconsistent team.
But Ant, what goaltending means in the playoffs, and who's got it and who doesn't.
I know, and believe me, I would love to see Tampa beat them so that it stays this way. That Toronto can't win a playoff series.
Yeah, they're misery.
But even if they do win one, they're not beating Boston. They're not.
No.
So it doesn't matter. So that's what I'm saying. So like, yeah, okay, even if they do win one playoff series this year, do you look forward and say, oh, well, that's good, that's progress? No, I wouldn't go Dubas at all.
Yeah, me either. Let's talk about Danny because, we've talked about the resume that he's put together because he didn't just come from former player, rest on his laurels. He started out in player development. He got into basically scouting for a period of time, went back to school at Wharton, ran the ECHL team in Maine. So he's put in his work. He actually started on the business side as well with Tilger. But he seems like a guy that's positioned himself. And, the one thing about Danny, while he's an incredible gentleman, he's a vicious competitor.
Mm-hmm.
Vicious. So, Ant, what do you think of the position with him on there? We haven't had John since. He's been named
kill him with kindness. That's Danny Briere, right? I mean, no question about
it. Until I need to use the stick.
Yes. So I think Danny's path is certainly a different one. And it's good that he came a different way. I feel like there have been some people in hockey ops that have been there for a while who felt that Danny kind of pushed his way into this position, almost like forced his way into this position. And that's okay. That's okay. But that goes to show, to me, that it's just not another branch of the tree, right? I mean, if there is some question about how he, that he's a little bit of an interloper, that he kind of, so like, Ant, like I'll throw this one to you since you're up in Montreal. Like there are people who believe that Briere was never really a legitimate finalist for the Montreal GM's position, but that he called in some favors to be considered in that regard and have it get out publicly that was kind of a direction that the Canadians were thinking about going, just to expedite his potential stature, absolutely grow his stature and to expedite the possibility of getting a better position within the Flyers organization.
Well, I didn't hear that, but I mean, with the way that the media talks about him up here, like he's clearly very popular. And like, you hear like I remember when he got hired, like I'd go to the gym and like TVA Spa and RDS, like all I saw was Dan Breer's face. Like we're very proud people in Quebec. Everyone was super happy. But I mean, if that was the case and he did that, I mean, I guess he pulled it off pretty strategically because look, 15 months later, he's in charge of the Philadelphia Flyers hockey ops department. But I mean, look, we heard was it that it came down to him, Kent Hughes, and I believe it was Matthew Darsh were the three guys. And I remember I was at a game around that period of time. I believe it was right before Christmas 2021, and he was there with the Flyers. And at that point in time, he was in charge of ICYMI Mariners and doing work on the player development side. So I'm sure he was considered on some level, but if he did call in some favors, I mean, they would be pretty strategic on his end, but he's clearly doing something right in some regard, right? Because I've heard a lot that they feel like he's the guy, and you've reported this on a lot, Ant, that like the business side and the hockey upside have been on two completely different pages for quite some time, and they feel like he could be the side to bring both together. But one thing I've really like wondered about, and it seems like all but a slam dunk that he's going to be the next general manager. But given his close relationship with those from Comcast, like, would it not almost be better to position him as president of hockey ops? That's what I've thought about a lot.
Yeah, I said that on the radio yesterday. I went on did a radio interview yesterday, and I immediately said, "Look, if I'm being honest about how I see things, I think Danny is better suited to be that guy who would fit the president role than he would be the general manager role."
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to be the GM. I'm pretty confident he's going to be the GM and somebody else is going to be the president. But I think that he fits the other role better. I really do. But we'll see. I guess we'll see how it plays out. Again, because of his past with working in the business side of things, running the Maine Mariners. I know it's an ECHL team, but he ran it from a business perspective. I think that's where Danny is really, really good. And yes, he's done a great job of learning how to be a scout and learning how to look at things, look at players a certain way. But I do think that he's better suited for a more executive position than general manager. But that's my opinion.
I think the one thing that tips in his favor as the GM too, I think it's what he wants to do. He wants to construct a team and have those decisions on personnel and, a roster build. And I think the other part is you see a lot of general managers around the league, first-time general managers having success. Look at Bill Guerin. Look at Chris Drury in New York. You see these young general managers. They're all in that same 44 to 46 age range, with the exception of Dubas, who's a lot younger. You have your older guard too, like Armstrong and those guys. But you see a lot of the young guy. Greer gets the job in San Jose. And I think that teams are recognizing that to build today's type NHL roster, you have to have somebody that knows today's type NHL play. So if it's a former player, they have to have played pretty recently. Danny retired in 2014-15. So he's not that far removed. So I think that that's part of it too. It's kind of imitation is the most serious form of flattery. You see these teams that all have put a president in place and a young general manager. So, a lot of times a GM too, Ant, will build a team with some of the traits that they had as a player, their own likeness. So I think that could be part of what Danny's strategic vision is as well. So speed, skill, and ferocious competitors are basically what he's going to be looking for.
Yeah, and that one surprised me. I mean, obviously, if there's any player who really kind of, if you go back in time, if there's any player who you would put as the poster boy for the change that happened after the lockout in 04-05, it's Danny Briere, right? I mean, he was the kind of player who became one of the best players in the game after the lockout. That probably
he was waived in Phoenix.
That wouldn't have been that. Not that he didn't score. I mean, he was he did have a good season, I think, before the lockout. I think his 03-04, he did have a really nice season, but he would not have been the player he was post-lockout, pre-lockout, right? So, I mean, that's kind of what hockey has become, right, in that regard. And now we see, up in your neck of the woods, the Q's eliminating fighting altogether. So the future of hockey is going to be more of this. It's going to be more of speed and skill and less of the physical play. So I think that, yes, you're right. And Danny would probably want to do that anyway, but it's probably also a good thing for this organization, considering that's where the game currently is, and it looks like in the future it's where it's going to stay.
Yeah. Well, I look at it in a way of just like, so I've heard that Danny is a proponent of keeping Barry and Brent. And obviously we know that he had a big hand in hiring John Tortorella, and Tortorella isn't going anywhere, no matter who is in the GM. So that doesn't really matter. But I'm just kind of thinking about this is like, we know Comcast likes Danny. And if, let's say, they're going to trust his opinion on things, he's going to vouch for Barry and Brent. But then you're going to hire a president of hockey ops who is technically higher than Danny and all these AGMs and all these coaches, but he has to keep all these AGMs and all these coaches. And I just start to say, like, well, then who's really in charge here? Like, isn't the president supposed to oversee everyone in hockey ops, not be told, like, well, this is your team and you got to make do with them? And that's why I would say, like, if Danny was president, then it kind of falls better in the pecking order type of things, where like you bring in a GM and you're just like, okay, well, we're going with this coach and these are your staff, but that's because Danny's the president and he has faith in all these guys.
Well, that's where this thing needs to be done exactly right. That everybody knows their role. Your job as the GM, your job as the president to assist the GM and be the buffer. That's where you got to get it right. Everybody's got to be on the same page as to what their duties are.
I really do not want to see a situation like we saw in Buffalo with Pat LaFontaine, where Pat LaFontaine comes in as the president of hockey ops, and I believe it was a couple months, and is just like, what the fuck is this? I'm out, and he pulls the chute. Or then we saw it not as rapidly, but we saw something similar happen in Vancouver with Trevor Linden, where I believe there was a kind of a power struggle between him and Jim Benning, and he pulls the chute and he's out after a year or so. So, I mean, I if this is the direction they want to go and they feel it's the best, I'm all for giving the benefit of the doubt to a brand new clean slate and a new way of thinking. But like, if it's going, and the thing I heard about Ray Shero, where like, well, he maybe wants to go somewhere where he has full say on hockey ops as a GM, as opposed to just being the president. Like, is that kind of what they're going to be looking for in a president? It's like, well, you're not really going to have a say in hockey ops. You're just here to be the buffer. But then who's really in charge? Is it the general manager or the president? And usually, theoretically, it is always the president. So that's why I've defaulted to lately. And I'm with Ann here and I'm with you, Jay, that I do think that Dollars to Donuts, Sam Greer will have that interim tag ripped off and he'll be the next general manager. And it is something he wants. I think it's already been verbalized to him, to be honest with you, that he will be the next GM. But I'm just wondering, are you going to bring in a president of hockey ops and then a couple months later he's going to be like, you know what, I'm the president, but I'm not really the president. Am I just a figurehead here? I want more say. So it is imperative that they get it absolutely right, because you don't want a situation where said president is pulling the chute after X amount of months or years.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's wrap it up there, boys. Great stuff. Tons to discuss. We're going to have to reconvene in a week or so's time, the three of us again.
Absolutely.
And do this again. There's so much to talk about, and we'll see how deep the changes go. But two big ones already. General Manager Chuck Fletcher, and then the chairman and governor of the Flyers, Dave Scott. And it certainly feels like a fresh new day for sure. Check out Anthony Sanfilippo's work on crossingbroad.com. Hear him on Snow the Goalie and the Crossing broadcast. He'll be providing Phillies coverage to the nth degree as well. And Anthony DeMarco's work on the fourthperiod.com. Give Ann a follow on Twitter at ADeMarco25 and Anthony Sanfilippo at AnSanPhilly. Thanks, boys.
Yeah, anytime. Love talking with you. Love talking with you, boys.
All right, there goes the dueling Anthonys, and we go to how about a third Anthony? We go to Antonio. We go to Tone's Takes. What's going on, Tone?
Hey, what's up, Jason? How you doing, bud?
Holy Anthony, I met my quota today.
Yeah.
That's
It's like Goodfellas.
insane.
Everybody's name's Maria and Peter and Paul.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, like in The Sopranos, he goes, his dad's name was Johnny Soprano. Uncle Johnny, they would use like this Uncle Johnny, Uncle Pat, or something like that. Like they
Yeah,
had to
yep.
separate them all. Here we got Paul, we got Paulie.
Yep.
Oh man, Tone, what's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing?
Doing good. Got a good card tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Playoffs are it's getting close. What, 3
Creeping.
weeks? I think we're at 3 weeks. I think they start April 17th, I
Yep.
believe, or so
Yeah. Flyers
3
wrap up
weeks
on
getting down the
April
wire.
13th.
Yep.
Let's
Crazy,
start
man.
off.
Went by quick.
Yeah, let's start off the plays tonight. How about we go to St. Louis, where the Vancouver Canucks and Eliason with 35 goals this year, 93 points. He's having a year. Take on the Canucks are taking on the Blues tonight, and you got a little minus money here, but you like the Canucks in this game.
Yeah, short line on Vancouver, minus 105. They've won 8 of their last 10 games.
Yeah.
Talkin has been a great help in that dressing room, but also my boy Thatcher Demko. I'm a big fan of his since he's returned from injury. He's healthy. He looks great. He's 7-3 in his last 10 starts, 2.11 goals against, .925 save percentage. I like the Vancouver Canucks here to stay hot. St. Louis is back off of a road trip. It was only 3 games, but they were still out west. I've only had a day off in between, so I think the Canucks can jump on them tonight.
When you look inside this game, I know you like Besser too, with a shot on goal total here, plus money.
Yeah, plus 102. He's hit it in 6 straight. Since Horvat left, he's kind of picked it up a little bit. In those 6 games, he's averaging 3.2 shots per game on 5.5 attempts. He hit this in both previous meetings with St. Louis this year. He had 5 earlier in the season and 3 in the last meeting, which was in St. Louis. So I think he's a good plus money play here. So.
All right, so you get plus 102 on that. Let's go to a game tonight where, Pittsburgh is a team that is solidifying their playoff position kind of nice at this point. They're 3 points up on Florida. They've played 1 less game, so they have a game in hand on Florida. Buffalo, they got 5 points on Buffalo. They played the same amount of games. So they're starting to solidify, but only going to solidify further if and only if they can continue to pile up some wins. They go to Detroit tonight to take on the Red Wings, but you like the total here.
Yeah, I'm going to be on their team total over 3.5. It's minus 113. Nedeljkovic is going for Detroit. He has limited time this year with injuries, .883 save percentage, 3.83 goals against. Pittsburgh should come away with a clean win here. Everything else is juice, and I'd rather not take them regulation or -1 because I still don't trust them defensively. So I think with the team total here, I'm gonna go that route. Like you said, they're in a spot right now, but they're only 3 points up. They do have, Florida has a game in hand, so they need to still string together some wins here. But I do think that they should sneak in and get that last spot in the East.
And Crosby, by the way, and now 17th straight season I think it is of a point per game player. He's got 85 points, crazy. 31 and 54. And I think only one player had more. That was Waino.
Yep. Still one of the best players in the game all around.
Dude's
maybe the best all around player in the game.
Yeah, animal. I was looking at the lottery odds today for the NHL draft lottery on May 8th, and the 3% chance of landing the number 1 overall pick is the Washington Capitals. Imagine if they land the number 1 overall pick. They get Bedard with the tail end of Ovechkin.
Oh man.
It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting to see where he goes, man. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, there would be so many good fits. I mean, he'd be a good fit in Columbus with the talent they have up there. He'd be a good fit in Anaheim with Zegras. Montreal would be a good fit. I mean, a lot of the teams that are in the lottery, they have good young players. So it's going to be interesting.
He'd fit great in Philly. I know that.
Yes, he would. Absolutely.
I'll tell you what, I like that Fantilli too. Did you see him the other night from Michigan against Penn State?
Yeah. Yep.
Kid controls the ice in all zones, man. He's bigger body, and I think he's going to be excellent as well. So people get your stuff at dimers.com. Where else?
Yep, and on Twitter at Tones Takes, plus 37 units for the year. 14 of the last 16 NHL weeks have been winning weeks. So looking to stay hot into the playoffs here.
Love it. And we'll be talking to you throughout the playoffs as well. Tone, great stuff. Thanks for doing this. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Jason.
There he is. Tone's Takes, our trifecta of Anthony's on the program today. Great stuff from Anthony Sanfilippo from Crossing Broad. Great stuff from Anthony DeMarco from thefourthperiod.com. And great stuff from Anthony, or Tone's Takes, we'll call him. And the great work he does, dimers.com, and give him a follow at Tone's Takes on Twitter as well. That's going to put a wrap on this episode 59 of Stick to Hockey Live. Flyers in action tonight, wrapping up the 7-game homestand against Montreal. So enjoy your hockey tonight. We'll talk to you next time on Stick to Hockey Live. Have a great day, everybody.